Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Casey Pifer, Atlas Network's Institute Relations Director, and I am so happy that all of you are here with us today and to be joined by a stellar panel representing our 2020 TFA finalists. One of the coolest parts of my role at Atlas over the last 6 years has been the opportunity to get to know the Templeton Freedom Award finalists over the years. Not only do I get an inside look at the most impactful and inspiring think tanks across the world, but I also get an inside look at how they are doing it. It is an amazing job. If you're unfamiliar with the Templeton Freedom Award program, it is generously sponsored by the Templeton Religion Trust, and it annually honors the legacy of Sir John Templeton by identifying and recognizing the most exceptional contributions to the understanding of free enterprise and the public policies that make human fulfillment and prosperity possible across the globe. Each year, this program awards $270,000 in prizes, and tonight at Freedom Dinner, you'll get to find out, along with us, who the winner of the grand prize is. That's a $100,000 grand prize being announced tonight, and it'll be one of our stellar panelists today. I've been doing this session for quite a while now. I think it's my 4th year running this Templeton Freedom Award finalist interview. And one thing has not changed. I'm still the only female in the session, so maybe we'll get there one day. But in all seriousness, something that truly hasn't changed with this session is that year over year, the application pool for the Templeton Freedom Award has become more competitive than ever. And I know I say that every year when I'm on stage talking to our Templeton Freedom Award finalists, but truly it becomes such a difficult job for our Atlas committee to make the final 6 selections for our Templeton Freedom Award finalists. And I'm sure it's an even harder job for our independent audited judges who make the decision on our winner. I am so excited for you to hear from our stellar panelists today. They are an incredibly inspiring group of individuals who are going to share with you what they've accomplished and how they've done it so that you can be inspired and learn to take your work to new heights. I am thrilled to introduce my panelists today, starting with Reiner Heufers of the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies based in Jakarta, Indonesia. Hi, Reiner, welcome.
Hi, Casey. Thanks for having me.
And next up, we have Dhanuraj from the Center for Public Policy Research in Kochi, India. Hi, Dhanu.
Hi, Casey. Hi, Casey. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
And next up, we have Niels Veldhuis from the Fraser Institute, based in Vancouver, Canada. Welcome, Niels.
Hi, Casey. Delighted to be here.
And next, we have Loria from the Ideas Labs, based in San Jose, Costa Rica. Welcome, Luis.
Hi, Casey. It's great to be here and to share the screen with all these amazing people.
Wonderful. And next up, we have Matt Mitchell from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, based in Virginia. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Casey, and congratulations to all the other fellow finalists.
Wonderful. And finally, we have our final representative of the Templeton Freedom Award finalist, Brian Jablonski from the Property Environment Research Center in Bozeman, Montana. Welcome, Brian.
Yeah, good morning, Casey. Good morning from snowy Montana.
We've got quite a few time zones represented here. Niels is with us early at 6:30 in the morning in Vancouver, all the way over to Jakarta, Indonesia. So thank you all for being here with us. We're so excited to hear from you. So as I mentioned, we only have 60 short minutes, and so many panelists and so much to get through. So we're going to keep this first part pretty brief. We'll go through in the order that I introduced you, and please give us a 60-second to 90-second project description, what you accomplished and why you're on the stage. And then just for the audience information, we will try to get to Q&A, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and if we can get to it at the end, we will. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started with Reiner. Why don't you start us off? Why are you on stage today as a Templeton Freedom Award finalist?
Thank you, Casey. Well, imagine you're going to a supermarket, you see beef on the shelves. Beef is about $10 a kilo. You have rice there, that's about $1 per kilo. That would be something that you would be familiar with in the United States. The problem is, in Indonesia, we have the same prices for the same goods in the supermarkets. While in the United States, you have a $4,000 monthly income on average. In Indonesia, we only have 200. So what happens is people eat rice, carbs all the time. They don't eat animal protein. They don't eat other nutritious food. They end up only with carbs. That leads to malnutrition. We have a quarter of all children 5-year-old in Indonesia that are malnourished and stunted, which is scarring them for life. So this is really a huge problem. These prices are extraordinarily high. What to do about it? Increase productivity so that the prices come down. Or this is a long-term solution, or as a short-term solution, also allow imports, because these goods are cheaper on the world market than they are in Indonesia. So our think tank, the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, has been arguing and advocating for lower food prices through more open food trade. We have done that over the years, and people would say, so what about the farmers? Are the Indonesian farmers the victims of this? And we're saying, well, look at it. The farmers not even have the $200. They only have $100. So they are the poorest of the poor. They are not benefiting from this regime that we have at the moment. And on the second thought, the farmers are actually two-thirds net consumers of food. So they eat far more than they actually produce. So they would benefit from lower food prices themselves by way of being consumers as well. So we've been advocating for this for a couple of years. And what has happened over the time from 2016 to 19 is that a couple of food trade policies were revised. We had some liberalization for different commodities, and we have calculated the total effect, and it brings total savings to the Indonesian people of $1.9 billion over that period of time. That, I guess, made us one of the finalists of the Templeton Freedom Award, and we are very, very grateful to be here and to be honored that way, and it's really a big honor for us to be among these finalists here. So thank you very much, Casey.
Wonderful. Congratulations, Reiner. Thank you so much for that. Dhanu, you're next.
Thank you, Casey, for this wonderful opportunity to present our case to the world audience, global audience, because I see this issue that we are going to discuss today is relevant to every continent, every region, every province, and every village and cities in the world. Back in 2016, shops could not remain open 25/7 in the state where I belong to. Shops were expected to close by between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. And women were not allowed to work after 7 p.m. or employees were not in a position to hire them to work before 6 a.m. So this was based on an act that was established in the state of Kerala, one of the provincial governments in India, which in fact restricted the employment opportunities for the women and also women's participation in many other works. So in 2016, with the support of Atlas Network Grant, we initiated this project. We initiated this project in October 2016. By 2018, with later on, we were hired by government of Kerala to advise them on this thing. I'll probably get the chance to give you the details about how we proceeded with this project. And later 2018, the government of Kerala notified the women could be hired to work in the night shifts. Women could be employed in the night shifts, and it opened opportunities for millions of women in this part of the world. I think this is a case that we should celebrate across the world. This could be a case that could be replicated across the world, across the continents. And as far as I understand, one of the studies done by World Bank in 2018, it says that around 2.8 billion women on the planet Earth could benefit from such a kind of, I would say it's a low-hanging fruit. We should tap this. And this is a classic example how think tanks could make those changes and make a huge change in the lives of millions and millions of women in the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dhanu. Congratulations again. Now moving on to Niels. Why are you on the stage this morning, this early morning for you?
Well, thanks, Casey. I wish I could be on the stage there with you. We're really humbled to be among these amazing finalists. Our initiative is based in a jurisdiction, a subnational jurisdiction in Canada, Alberta. This is historically the most economically free jurisdiction in North America, which includes all Canadian provinces and US states. What we saw about 10 years ago was that successive governments in Alberta, both on the right and the left, started putting in place really damaging policies that eroded Alberta's economic freedom. Alberta went from being #1 in North America down to 24th in North America. So a real slide. What we did was really two things. First, we wanted to educate Albertans on why things weren't going well in Alberta. So really talk about the problems, beat the drum on the problems. And we did that through a whole host of research studies that really laid the groundwork for then talking about solutions. And in 2018 and 2019, we produced over 25 papers highlighting solutions for Alberta to remake Alberta into the most economically free jurisdiction in North America. It covered tax policy, size of government, healthcare, education, regulation, and then we put all that together in a book called Alberta Prosperity, A Plan for Growth and Opportunity. We sent that book to everyone engaged in the political marketplace in Alberta, and we were very fortunate that the leader of the opposition at the time, a gentleman by the name of Jason Kenney, utilized that book in developing the platform for his party. 9 of our major ideas, again, covering the whole range of government programs, ended up in the platform for the Alberta Conservative Party. And in 2019, that party was elected. Jason Kenney became the premier of Alberta and started implementing most of the policies that we recommended. Of course, on some, they didn't go quite as far as we would have liked, but no doubt that the current government is remaking Alberta in terms of economic freedom, advancing economic freedom. And while Alberta is not yet the most economically free jurisdiction in North America, again, I think if progress continues, it may well end up there. So we're delighted to have been a good part of that process. It really was a public education campaign. And we're going to keep pushing to ensure Alberta gets to that #1 position again. So thanks again, Casey. Delighted to answer any questions, of course, when that time comes.
Wonderful. Congratulations again to the whole Fraser team. Moving on to Luis Loria of Ideas Labs. Luis, why are you up here on our virtual stage, I should point out?
Thank you, Casey. Well, all Costa Ricans are equal, but some Costa Ricans are more equal than others. During the past decades, corrupt elites hijacked the lawmaking powers in order to pervert the laws and create immoral benefits in the form of luxury pensions. 16 luxury pension schemes were approved in Congress. Former presidents of the Republic, congressmen, Supreme Court judges, and well-respected academics and opinion leaders, among others, live as societal leeches and suck yearly more than 2% of the country's GDP or 10% of the central government spending. At Ideas Labs, we have exposed the costs and the immorality of a luxury pension scheme that allows the politically connected to live opulently at the expense of ordinary citizens. More than 50,000 Costa Ricans have signed our publicchange.org petition, more than 1% of the Costa Rican population of 5 million. 10 luxury pension reform projects have been presented in Congress by 5 different political parties, and 2 of those have been unanimously approved. We feel very honored for being selected as a finalist of the Templeton Freedom Award for our efforts to put an end to legalized plunder in the form of luxury pension schemes that benefit ticos con corona, or Costa Ricans with crowns, as we call them.
Thank you, Luis. Such an important effort there from you and your team. Moving on to Matt Mitchell of the Mercatus Center. Matt, tell us a little bit about your project and why you've been nominated for the Templeton Freedom Award.
Sure. So we're here because of a little-known healthcare law known as Certificate of Need. If it didn't exist, I feel like Ayn Rand would have to invent it in one of her novels. It's a pretty ridiculous public policy. The way it works is in 35 states and DC, if you want to open or expand a healthcare facility, so if you want to buy a hospital bed or a MRI machine, or even if you want to open a clinic to treat those with drug and alcohol addictions, you have to go before a board and ask for permission. The board is not going to assess your qualifications. They're not going to assess your safety record or even the adequacy of your facility. Instead, their whole goal is to second guess your belief that the community will benefit from having this new product or service. What's remarkable, is that the process can take, in trying to convince them that you need this, your community needs this service, it can take months, even years, tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your competitors will often, or your would-be competitors will often sit on the board. And if they don't, they're often invited to come before the board and oppose your application. Remarkably, you get to the end of the process and you might not even obtain your, permission. And part of the reason for that is that your application can be denied just if it's shown that it will increase competition. So these laws persist, as you might guess, because they protect incumbents from competition. And these incumbents tell a lot of stories. They talk about how con laws will decrease cost or somehow increase access to care or somehow enhance the quality of care. But the truth is that 15 states do not have con laws. About 40% of the US population lives in one of these states. And so using careful econometric techniques, you can compare outcomes in these states with outcomes in the con states. And what we find is that con laws do not protect patients. They protect incumbent providers from competition. So they limit access to care, they increase the cost of care, and they decrease the quality of care in a number of ways. And we can get into the specifics of what we found, but it's pretty remarkable, some of the stats. I mean, 30% fewer hospital beds per capita in a con state relative to a non-con state, fewer dialysis clinics and hospice care facilities, higher mortality rates following heart attack, heart failure, and pneumonia, higher costs, almost $200 more spent in a con state per person per year relative to non-con states. So about 6 years ago, we started this research and we set out as our goal to make it, ensure that anywhere a state legislator was talking about con, this information was front and center at their fingertips. So we've had over 200 citations and briefings and testimonies over the last several years. We've seen remarkable changes. We've seen Florida, New Hampshire, West Virginia, either outright repeal con laws or dramatically scale them back. We've seen proposals to do the same in about half a dozen to a dozen other states advance. And then COVID hit. And we showed that we did new research showing that con laws were associated with a greater than twice the likelihood of having a shortage in your hospital beds. And the shortages were about 16 times larger in per capita terms in con states relative to non-con states. And 24 states have now eased or repealed their con laws temporarily in response to COVID. It's our mission to try to make sure that they have the facts in front of them so that they can see the benefits of making these temporary changes permanent.
Such an important project for our times right now. Thanks so much, Matt. And finally, moving on to Brian Jablonski. Tell us a little bit about PERC's project and why you're up on stage today.
Yeah, thank you, Casey, and thank you to the Atlas Network. And what a tough task having to follow these incredible finalists and incredibly impactful projects. Look, PERC believes that conservation works best when it works for people too, that the welfare of humans and nature is actually connected. And that's really our contribution to the fight for freedom here. We set out to prove that you could be pro-conservation and pro-markets at the same time. And in that vein, we pioneered an approach called free market environmentalism. And our project applied that approach to the endangered species wildlife in the United States. First, we reimagined how reduced regulations under the nearly 50-year-old Endangered Species Act could actually help recover wildlife by rewarding rather than punishing owners of private lands, ranchers and farmers, where 80% of all endangered species live. And this was the first major reform to the Endangered Species Act in almost 50 years. Second, we worked to help imperiled wildlife on public land by reducing the number of wild horses that are overgrazing our federal rangelands and hurting species like pronghorn antelope, bighorn sheep, and sage grouse. We proposed a market-based adoption incentive that led to a 91% increase in wild horse adoptions, and get this, $170 million savings to taxpayers in the process. So all proving that market incentives aligned properly can change the behavior of people in a way that leads to greater conservation of wildlife.
Amazing. Well, I hope you are all feeling as inspired as I have been over the last 6 months getting to know these projects and these teams. We're going to jump into questions now. As a reminder for our panelists, please keep your answers to the questions brief so that we can get around the room. If you have commentary as somebody else is answering a question, please raise your hand just to indicate that you'd like to speak up. Okay, so something that strikes me as I listen to all your projects and as I've gotten to learn about all of your projects is that some of them are really long-term, right? And you also mentioned, Danu has mentioned the idea of low-hanging fruit, right? And I think this kind of brings up this big question for think tanks and nonprofits generally, which is how do you establish those priorities, those North Stars, and stay focused on them despite being pulled. So there's so many problems in the world, right? How do you stay focused? And donors, well-intentioned donors, will have some really good ideas that might pull you in another direction. How do you stay focused? So why don't we start with Reiner here, because we actually discussed this recently, and then we'll move on if anyone else has some comments there.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. I think that's really a crucial question. You can pick low-hanging fruits, but that's not necessarily your choice. You can also go for the very difficult ones and just try to set an example there. When we addressed rice trade, that was one of the most touchy and difficult issues you could do in a country like Indonesia, but we thought we'd take it on with full force and not go for the low-hanging fruit. So this is a strategic choice that you have to make, and strategy is the art of saying no. So you need to be able to say we do this but not that, and I think all these projects that are here on stage today have done that at one point. And we chose food because it's an essential item. Indonesia is a very agricultural and rural country. So you want to pick something that is relevant for your audience in the country and that where you think you can actually over the long run have success. But indeed, you need to be sure that you stay on target, you stay on focus, and you're not just going in any direction just because there is maybe some funding available or so.
Thank you, Reiner. Danu, you have a comment on this topic?
Yes, I see when we look around, there are so many challenges, so many issues that we see every day, we confront every day. And this was one among them. And I don't think any of us or my team thought about it when we were confronting probably from our childhood days, when we go for shopping in the evening, shops remain closed and we don't see women there or even you can't find shops open 24/7. And it's very coincidental at times, we find these issues and we understand that these are very significant, important issues that we have to tackle. And while we were doing this project, the enormity and the significance of the project, we realized by doing it, because a state like Kerala, which has got a high literacy rate, I think around 1.8 million girl students pass their 10th standard, the school leaving certificates every year, but the women participation in the workforce is only 26%. And some of the statistics show that out of 100 job seekers in Kerala, 64 are women. And then we realized in an economy which is more or less contributed by the service sector, 65% of our economy is contributed by the service sector. More and more employment opportunities are there, and women are denied that. It's injustice, it's arbitrary, it is inequitable. So we looked at it, and then we found it's a one-liner in that whole act that could make a huge change in the lives of millions of women in the country. Not only in millions of women in the country, probably across the world. Because I realized later on from one of the IMO studies, if we change these smaller things, probably World Bank says 2.6 billion women could be impacted. Then IMO says that around 800 million women who are working in the workforce, they are not able to move to the next level because of these restrictions in the laws. So we were actually removing the barrier. That's what I said. It's a low hanging fruits.
Right. And CPPR, obviously, you've been working on this since 2016, so it's a long-term, low-hanging fruit topic, but a very long-term focus. Niels, I think you had a comment here.
Yeah, Casey, I mean, I agree with my panelists. It really is about focusing. And when you focus, you have to be willing to fight the fight for a long period of time. I mean, all of the panelists here created very significant change in a short amount of time. But most of the battles we all fight, can take decades to win. And so when you're focused on strategy, and Reiner is exactly right, when you're saying no to other things and you're saying yes to particular strategies, you have to be willing to fight for the long term. And that's certainly something we did in Alberta. It was important enough for us to say, we're going to fight this thing. We're going to fight this thing for a long period of time. I mean, we got lucky in some sense and created change and things lined up in a short amount of time. But really having the resources and having the stamina and having everyone behind you for a long fight is something that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit and shift to Matt here. Like the Fraser Institute project, Matt's project is, the Mercatus project is very much focused on kind of this competition between states or provinces, right? And so what does that look like, Matt? And how do you get states to care? And what does that all look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, so this is the old story of states as laboratories of democracy. It's really helpful from a researcher's perspective to have the ability to compare outcomes in one state to another. Policymakers are very risk averse. Their overriding concern is to not rock the boat. And so particularly in an instance like this, and I think this is probably true for all of our projects, there's an enormous amount of inertia to keep the status quo the way it is. Very well-organized, concentrated interests benefit from maintaining the status quo. And what we sort of view our goal as trying to represent the unorganized interests, the patients, the taxpayers who have no PACs. They don't even know about the laws from which they are suffering. And so, if you can help policymakers see that, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. Look at the next state over. Look at the experience of people who are of constituents in your competitors' states. They're not experiencing, the deleterious effects of this policy the way your constituents are. I feel like that helps them overcome some of that natural resistance to change and their natural sort of small c conservative instincts about not rocking the boat.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit because something that you said reminded me, because we're talking about long-term, we're talking about keeping your eye on the prize, and there's also a lot to be said for seizing on opportunity when it's available. And I think with PERC, for example, the Department of Interior was a bit more open, right, to some change. And so seizing on that opportunity with Ideas Labs obviously involved a lot of momentum from the community. So can you talk about kind of identifying those opportunities and what that process looked like for you? Let's start with Luis and then we'll move to Brian.
Sure. Well, first of all, I wanted to comment on the opportunity that we saw when you could think about working on a subject related to political crisis or an economic crisis, but we decided to work on the moral crisis. This that has to do with the elites that are extracting in the form of legalized plunder the resources from the rest of society, including those that are less well off. So we were able to explain in very simple terms to the population the immorality of this dynamic. And we told them, since you're in school age, you learn that it's wrong to steal from others. and it's equally wrong to legally steal from others. And it's terrible when those who should lead by example, the basically political leaders, academic leaders, very influential people in powerful positions, are showing the next generations that you could get away with legal plunder. So connecting with the population was relatively easy, and we were able to gain a lot of public support for these reforms.
Such an important message about the importance of bringing in emotional arguments when you're pushing for reform and impact. Brian, do you have a comment on this topic of just kind of seeing opportunity and seizing on it when things become politically possible?
Yeah, it's a great point, Casey. I think the Department of Interior, when it came in 4 years ago with kind of the new leadership there, really came in with a mindset of let's try things different. And that's hard in the conservation world. I think in the conservation world, people get very attached to what they're used to. So you take something like the Endangered Species Act that's been around for 50 years, and it's a very popular act. I mean, people out there love the Endangered Species Act. But the act was really supposed to do two things. It was supposed to keep species from going extinct, and then it was also supposed to recover those species to get those populations back. And what very few people know, but the leadership that was there knew, was that it was a 99% success rate when it came to keeping species from being extinct, but it was miserable grade when you were talking about recovering species. Only a little more than 2% of the species on the list actually got recovered. We like to say, we like to quote the old Eagle song, Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And so the administration was really, I think, amenable to thinking anew here, and PERC could kind of come in as like a pseudo think tank for the Department of Interior and bring some of the research that we've developed over our own 40 years and actually have a chance to implement it. So they were very accepting to a report that Jonathan Wood, one of our research fellows, wrote that was going to make some tweaks to the Endangered Species Act, how it was implemented, to actually, rather than imposing command and control, to actually reward landowners as species recover. As species improve, don't keep regulating them the same way. Reduce regulation to kind of reward and give incentive for folks to improve the condition of species. And then the wild horse crisis was really, Luis, you talk about the emotion and how do you connect. Horses are like one of the most emotional things out there. People love horses. And the solutions for having this proliferation of horses on the range was either euthanasia, which was never going to fly, or it's sterilization of the horses, which is incredibly expensive and hard to pull off. And people weren't thinking about adoption as much and what you could do to increase adoption of these horses. And the agency was actually charging a fee, and it wasn't getting many people to adopt horses, and it was costing the agency nearly $48,000 per horse that they would take off the range and put in these holding facilities. So we had a simple suggestion to our researchers, pay somebody $1,000 to take the horse. And that ended up being that little thing ended up being this huge incentive that got adoptions really rolling and, end up saving taxpayers. The government would pay $1,000 instead of $48,000 over the life of a horse. So we were real fortunate to have a Department of Interior that was willing to play catch on some of these innovative ideas.
Yeah, Ryan, it's such an important point, as I said, about kind of the emotion and also getting your community behind what you're working on. Reiner, did you have a comment here?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I think strategy and the long-term focus goes very well together with opportunities. I mean, Matt was mentioning COVID-19 already. And I think, as a think tank, I believe you need to be hungry for these opportunities. You need to watch out for them and you jump on them. And that must be part of your strategy, actually. So when COVID-19 happened and we were over the initial question about toilet paper, the next question was about, do we have enough food? And so for us, this was in a really terrible situation. It was a great opportunity and we jumped on it and we conducted so many events and wrote policy briefs and so on. And that was a major boost for our for our advocacy. So I just wanted to comment on the fact that this is actually a very compatible strategy with opportunities.
Dhanu, did you have another comment here on sort of tugging at the emotion or anything our panelists have said so far?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, did this work, finished this work in a communist government. We are ruled by a communist government as part of the world, and obviously the questions were like when you talk about sensitive issues like this, labor, because we were actually looking at the labor reforms, and then we finally got into this women empowerment, and but I think we were very sensitive, and the government, whether it's communist or not. We felt that they're also looking for opportunities, and we were looking at this issue very objectively. We were bringing so much of evidence to the table, and we also identified people who are actually ready to buy these ideas in the government. And there was a coalition building in the process, and we engaged, we participated, and we were very persuasive also. So, like Reiner said, we should look for opportunities, and in this case, in fact, this is a big coalition. I mean, it's a coalition of trade unions, a coalition of women groups. It is a coalition of chambers of commerce and industries. So we were able to convince the government, and government, by the way, because any communist government faces this issue. I mean, in terms of ease of doing business, how entrepreneurial in your approach and all. And unfortunately for the government of Kerala, the communist government, Kerala is ranked very poor in ease of doing business, 28 in the 30 rank index. So they were also looking for opportunities and to improve the business ecosystem of the state, and we tapped that opportunity, and we could able to convince them, and they notified in 15 months all these changes that we were asking from them.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask Niels, because Dhanu mentions that CPPR was seen as objective. And something I wanted to hear from Niels about, Fraser represents probably the longest standing think tank represented here. And how do you maintain that nonpartisan, objective understanding, despite the fact that, maybe it is, in this case, a particular party that adopts your whole list of suggestions. So how do you balance that over time?
Yeah, I think it's a really important balancing act. I mean, for us, it always comes down to measurement. We measure what matters to Canadians, and then we educate them. It's not about right or left. It's really about how do you improve their lives. And one of the nice things about our initiative in Alberta was that we could stir up some anger, and the anger wasn't directed at one political group over another, because we had successive governments on the left and the right do very damaging things. And so it was really more about what has been done to Alberta by previous governments. And that really broadened out the tent for change. So, being objective and trying to educate as broadly as possible, and using those opportunities when they arise is something that we really focus on. But the foundation of everything that we do is objective measurement. We don't get into political or partisan arguments.
Thank you, Niels. And that brings me over to Luis and Reiner, I think, which these organizations are younger, smaller. So how did your organization, let's start with Reiner, your organization kind of build credibility? You just celebrated your 5-year anniversary, and how do you institutionalize a young organization that's focused on results and impact and building that credibility?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. That's indeed a crucial issue for maybe not just relatively new think tanks, but definitely for those that are relatively new, because you have high staff mobility, whether you like it or not. We're all struggling with this. So you don't want your knowledge to go out the door when somebody leaves. You have your contact database, and you don't want people to walk away with their WhatsApp contacts and nobody has recorded them in the organization. So if you want to have a long-term goal, you need to make sure that the organization works on them and not just an individual staff member. So institutionalization is key to this, without, of course, overloading yourself with a major bureaucracy. But we have tools. Of course, we use Salesforce for the contact database. We have our G Drive to make sure that everything is stored on a shared drive, etc. so that we can actually have institutional knowledge more than personal knowledge in the organization. So I think, yeah, that matters a lot. And as a new organization, you cannot start early enough to actually institutionalize, because otherwise you run into all sorts of problems when colleagues leave, which might happen after 2-3 years. They want to pursue an academic career, maybe have been lured into a better paid position somewhere else. I mean, they leave for the best reasons. But nevertheless, you need to be prepared for that.
Thank you, Reiner. It's such a good point. And Luis, your team operates on a different model, right? You have several part-time and some volunteers. So tell us a little bit about building credibility as a nimble organization like that.
Yeah. Well, since we started working, that's 7 years ago. We're on our 7th anniversary now. It was clear for us that we wanted to tackle important problems for the Costa Rican society, and not just for Costa Rica, but also for Latin America. And the only way to do that successfully was through collaboration with, in some cases, with the government, with other NGOs, with civil society groups. And for example, in our Ticos con Corona campaign, we have collaborated with the technical authorities from the government, with the superintendent of pensions and the national director of pensions. We built a strong coalition with civil society organizations that were working towards similar goals. And so that is present in all of our projects. When we start to look at an issue, we immediately prepare a map of where are the relevant actors and where we can connect with them, and how to mobilize support in order to achieve our goals and have a greater impact. And this includes all of the activities that we do, collaboration through social media campaigns, public petitions, videos, VIP endorsement. So we have to look at the overall strategy in order to make things happen, in order to make a change in people's lives.
Thank you, Luis. So I want to move to, we talked about, you mentioned coalition building, and maybe I'll build this into this question. So for your teams, what was the key? You know, was it coalition building? Was it storytelling? Was it this emotional piece? What was that for you? Let's start with Matt, and because one of the things that struck me about at least the application from Mercatus was that you tied the problems with con laws to poverty, which I thought was really powerful. So can you talk a little bit about what was the key for your project success there?
Yeah, so on the poverty point, you know, among the many stories that are told about con laws is that they will somehow increase access to care for low-income populations. The theory is rather convoluted, but the basic idea is, okay, let's say Brian is a low-income, uninsured or underinsured patient. So what we're going to do is we're going to give Niels a monopoly in the hope that he charges Reiner a higher price and then somehow subsidizes Brian. It's a really complicated story, and we just looked at the simple data, and it doesn't hold up. You actually not only do you not see any greater incidence of charity care in con states relative to non-con states, you actually see that there's greater racial disparities in the provision of care in con states relative to non-con states. But that kind of a message, I think, does, to your point, resonate with a broad coalition. And Mercatus is fortunate in that we are not the only group working in this space. There are other organizations that are working hard to increase competition and access in healthcare, and they bring different skill sets to the issue. So Institute for Justice and the Pacific Legal Foundation are actively filing cases, as public interest law firms. That's something that we don't do. We hope to inform those cases and provide data that can, bolster their case, but, we're not going to be suing a government. Americans for Prosperity, state think tanks all across the country, those organizations are able to put together model legislation and do actual lobbying, which we don't do, and have more day-to-day interaction with policymakers to push the case. And one of the things we've tried to do, we have no pride of authorship here. We are happy to sit down with a state legislator or a local think tank or a grassroots group, give them our data and say, I hope you can take credit for this, and you guys can, if it works, you don't have to even mention our name. Just get the data in front of policymakers, because that's where you see real change.
Thanks, Matt. Brian, do you have a comment here? And one thing I wanted to also point out about PERC is I feel this project, the local, the horse adoption project, is so tied to having local knowledge about the problem, right? And can you speak to that a little bit in your response as well?
Yeah, no, and I want to follow up a little bit with what Matt said and kind of the secret to success. I mean, I think what all of us are offering are hopeful solutions, right? And you have to, it kind of goes back to the emotion. You have to show you care at the end of the day. You have to be pro-patient in the case of Matt. You have to be pro-woman in the case of Dr. D and the reforms there. You have to be pro-child. You have to be pro-wildlife. And you have to kind of prove that, because the burden of proof when you're a market-based organization or a freedom organization, often there's this label that comes with you that you're the ruthless capitalist showing up and that you're just sort of anti something. And I think we were able to, PERC, when you look at our team, we are real conservationists. I mean, we're out here every day, in the environment, work, living, and playing. Yellowstone National Park's a stone's throw from where I am right now. We have a former, backcountry national parks ranger who's our vice president of research. We've got a third-generation cattle rancher, who's on the team here, a former state wildlife commissioner, a former employee for a large traditional environmental not-for-profit. So you have to sort of lead with your heart on some of these things rather than your head sometimes, in order to get the credibility to advance the reforms that you really want to advance. And then on the local knowledge thing, that's absolutely critical. I don't think there are a lot of people out in the world, for example, when it comes to wild horses, that know what a challenge wild horses are out in the western part of the United States. And it's just not about protecting, the species that the horses compete with, but the horses are starving out here. You get these, especially if you look in like Nevada, you see the photographs of horses on the range there, and you've got the rib cages showing. And so people love their horses out here. People all across the world, I'd say it's the horses is the personification of the American West and the cowboy and the mystique of everything that we stand for here. But having that local knowledge is absolutely vital. And bringing that to a lot of times your policymakers are in state capitals and the bureaucrats are in state capitals, and they're removed from these issues. At the Department of Interior, how many of those employees are actually sort of Eastern-based versus Western-based? And you have to bring that knowledge, that local knowledge, to some of those centers of power.
Such an important point. I'm a horse girl myself, a stereotypical horse girl, so appreciate this. Niels, I think you had a comment. If you could be quick here, because we're running out of time. We've only got 7 minutes left. But we also have a question for the audience that I think would be good for the Fraser Institute, which is, were efforts mostly directed toward influencing government officials or the general population of your community?
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Casey. Just very quickly, what we try and do is educate the broad population in a jurisdiction, and we really believe that most politicians are followers, not leaders. They're going to get a read on what the average voter wants and develop policies that will get them elected. So change how the public thinks, and for the long term, you can actually change policy, and that's what we did in Alberta. And just touching very briefly on what Matt said, I think coalition building is so important. Change is so much easier when you have multiple groups saying similar but not the same things, and passing off your research. A lot of what kind of the way we think is we're in a relay race. And if we can pass off the baton to other groups that will use it and take credit for it, that's how you create change. So build the networks, let others take credit, and change will come a lot faster than if you're trying to do everything yourself.
Thank you so much, Neil. Okay, like I said, we're running out of time a little bit, so let's keep our answers brief. But my next piece is I asked everybody on the panel, if you can, to bring a real life story of how your work has impacted people in your communities. So for those of you who were able to bring that, please raise your hand. Does anyone have a real life story? Dhanu, we'll start with you and talk to us about the meaning of the change that happened as a result of your work.
It has got a domino effect, and it's not about women getting employed finally. It has got a domino effect in terms of eradication of poverty. It also boosts up other sectoral growth. It creates employment opportunities, not only for women, it also generates employment opportunities for men. So what we have seen in the last few months, unfortunately, we have this COVID time, so a real impact is yet to be assessed. But I could tell you from some of the statistics available in the public domain published by the government, unemployment rate among the women reduced by 6% in the last 1 year, 2018, 2019. And I believe it has got a lot to do with the present amendment. A lot of people started going out in the evening, going for shopping. And in fact, during this COVID time, this is a very relevant amendment because, we all talk about social distancing, we all talk about physical distancing. And we also conducted a campaign here saying that, your shops should be open now because your law permits you to open the shop. So why do you want to crowd and why do you want to spread coronavirus? So real-time impact are so many. We have seen stories. We also have seen many places women are hired now in the night shifts, and it has got profound impact on your settings, socio-economic settings of these people.
Absolutely, and I know that our friends in Sri Lanka are working on a similar project right now, Dhanu. So I'm sure you'll get connected.
I heard that. I heard Amita yesterday.
Very important.
We are happy to help them.
Yeah.
Share our knowledge.
You mentioned the pandemic, and something as I was reviewing everything again this week that struck me is one of the questions I was going to ask is how did the pandemic influence your projects? But it's really the other way around, right? Your projects influenced how the pandemic policy played out, and that's the case for Mercatus, for the CPPR in India, and also for chips in Indonesia. So that's pretty amazing. Reiner, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, I can just give you a couple of numbers. I agree with Niels that you have to measure everything. We had about 15,000 paper downloads last year. This year we had 70,000. So people are really curious about policy solutions because of the pandemic. And if you have a topic that is relevant, and the relevance point we have maybe not touched yet, then you are actually really in demand when it happens. So our download numbers have gone up tremendously. Our media mentions, we are in the media up to 150 times every month, just because our topics are so relevant. So people come and they want to know. And that also helps, of course, the coalition building. So the whole pandemic opened up so many relevant questions. And I do believe that our think tanks, believing in markets and believing in the power of people to actually solve problems, really have a good voice in this. So, and I've seen this across several partners of the Atlas Network.
Thank you, Reiner. Okay, so we only have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to do one thing for our audience. They asked about, did you target general population or government officials? Can you just raise your hand if it was government officials? Okay, primarily. Okay, and then general population.
Both.
So it's split. Multiple strategic audiences. Okay. And then to close out, I wanted to ask each of you to be super brief, one sentence. If you have one practical lesson that you learned or just tip from this project that you would share with everyone listening today. Let's start with Reiner and just go down the line. Or start with anyone who has something ready.
Somebody else first.
Matt.
I would say
Brian.
push the frontiers of the freedom movement. Out in the environment here, there aren't a lot of organizations that are looking at markets for environmental issues. And it's kind of fun to be one of the few that's out there on the boundaries of the freedom movement and really pushing the envelope there. So I would encourage everybody to look at other areas where markets aren't typically the solution and push the frontier out.
Absolutely, absolutely. One sentence, remember. Danu.
Since I'm from India and Louis has got Mahatma Gandhi on his backdrop, I would say Gandhi said, in a gentle way, we can shake the world. And, the small, long-hanging fruit, the gentle way to shake the world.
Wonderful. Matt, you're next.
So do the hard work of the analysis first, and then move to a second phase where you're willing and able to translate that to a broader audience anytime the opportunity arises, so that you can write an op-ed, a video interview, you could do a testimony, you can turn that out, within a couple of hours because you've already done the hard work.
Awesome. Niels, you're next.
Yeah, Casey, I think it's beating the drum. I mean, you're never going to change the world with one research paper. You're never going to change it with one project or one speech. You have to be consistent, do it over and over and over again to convince as many people as you possibly can.
Wonderful. And Luis?
Yeah, I will borrow a phrase from Nelson Mandela. He said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And that's basically what happened in our case. Everyone told us you shouldn't get into that issue. It's too hard to fight against all these powerful beneficiaries of luxury pensions, but we have achieved change and we're very proud of it.
Yeah, and that is a big feat, convincing the government to act against its own interest and its own pension. So great work there. And finally, we'll close with Reiner, one last bead of inspiration for the network here.
Choose what matters and make sure you get your team on board, because with a great team like ours in CHIPS, you can really achieve a lot. And so get your team on board.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you for being here with us today. I hope you learned as much from them as I have over the last 6 months. Please remember that one of the organizations that you have heard from today will win the $100,000 grand prize announced tonight at Freedom Dinner, and our runners-up will each receive a $20,000 grand prize, or $20,000 finalist prize as well. Please stay tuned. We've got Lights, Camera, Liberty Film Festival coming right up shortly. Thanks, everyone.